Welcome to the True Storyteller. Today, we're delving into a tragic case from India in 2009. This is the story of Sonali, a young woman forced into a marriage that led to abuse, desperation, and ultimately, murder. Let's explore what happened in a small Gujarat village. This tale begins with an arranged marriage and ends in heartbreak. Before we start, please like and subscribe to support our channel. Sonali grew up in Rajur, Gujarat, in a poor farming family. As the only daughter, she faced hardship from childhood, lacking both material comforts and opportunities. Her family couldn't afford much education, so Sonali only finished secondary school before helping on the farm. Village life taught her patience, but denied her the chances city girls had. Despite her struggles, Sonali was known for her beauty. Her dark skin, large eyes, and thick black hair drew attention. As a teenager, many young men tried to court her, but Sonali, modest and reserved, didn't encourage their advances. However, one person captured Sonali's heart: Omar, a 25-year-old from the same village. Kind and hardworking, Omar's family also struggled financially. They often met while working in the fields or at the village market. Their love grew quietly but sincerely. They shared their difficulties and unfulfilled dreams, finding comfort in each other's company. Sadly, their love was short-lived. The harsh realities of life intervened. Though Sonali and Omar loved each other, her family's poverty forced them to consider her future differently. In their society, marriage was often seen as a way to improve a family's status and finances. Sonali's parents began to view a wealthy match as their only escape from poverty. Sonali clung to hope for her future with Omar, but those happy days were numbered. At 23, her family decided to marry her to a rich family in Patan, near Ahmedabad. This decision was driven by financial pressure and village connections. The groom's wealthy family approached with a proposal. The groom, Sachin, was 20 and the family's only son. Despite their wealth, Sachin wasn't what Sonali's family expected. He had a low IQ and often behaved foolishly. However, the dowry offered was too substantial for Sonali's family to refuse. They thought not only of their daughter's future, but also of securing stability for themselves. The promise of wealth overshadowed Sonali's feelings for Omar. Sonali wept upon learning her parents' decision. She felt betrayed, reduced to a commodity. Her love for Omar seemed irrelevant in the face of this harsh reality. Omar, though he loved her deeply, knew he couldn't compete against money and power. Their relationship, while not officially over, was ended by her family's decision. The night before her wedding, Sonali lay awake. Anxiety and heartache consumed her. The expectations of her family and community weighed heavily, but she couldn't forget Omar. She knew her life was about to change drastically, marrying a man she didn't love and couldn't even converse with normally. Faced with this future, Sonali felt compelled to see Omar one last time. She snuck out in the darkness, walking familiar village paths filled with memories. They met in their usual spot in the fields, where they'd often stargazed and dreamed together. Omar stood silently in the darkness, his eyes filled with pain. They stood wordlessly for a long time, their hearts communicating without speech. This wasn't just a farewell, it was goodbye to their shared dreams. Finally, Sonali approached Omar, and they embraced. It wasn't the sweet embrace of young lovers, but one of pain and loss. Overwhelmed by emotion, they knew this was their last moment together. Sonali, heartbroken, decided to give everything to the man she loved. That night, in the deserted field, they shared a passionate encounter, connecting physically and emotionally. It was Sonali's way of preserving something of their love before her loveless marriage. All their pent-up desires and emotions were released that night. Afterward, they lay side by side, gazing at the stars, their hearts heavy with sorrow. They knew that come dawn, everything would change. Sonali would return to become another man's wife. Omar, though pained, understood he couldn't keep her. Before leaving, Sonali looked deeply into Omar's eyes one last time, etching the moment in her memory. The wedding day arrived swiftly. Sonali had no choice but to obey her parents, feeling helpless and heartbroken. As she left the village for her new home in Patan, Omar came to see her off. They exchanged a silent, pain-filled look. Sonali departed in quiet tears, leaving behind her first and only love. At her in-laws' home, Sonali quickly discovered the cruel reality of her marriage. Her husband, Sachin, was indeed mentally challenged, unable to fulfill the role of a husband. Their marriage existed only on paper, a transaction between families. However, the truth was far more brutal than Sonali had imagined. She gradually realized that the main reason for this marriage wasn't to be Sachin's wife, but to serve the lustful desires of her father-in-law, Shankar. At 48, Shankar was a cruel and violent man. Initially, he approached Sonali sweetly, trying to seduce her. He used suggestive words and ambiguous gestures, attempting to possess her subtly. Sonali skillfully avoided him, hoping he'd give up. She was afraid, but tried to maintain distance, believing if she didn't react, Shankar wouldn't dare go further. But her evasion couldn't last. Shankar, accustomed to using his power to get what he wanted, decided to take her by force when he realized his coaxing wasn't working. One night, when the household was asleep, Shankar entered her room. No longer just coaxing, he brutally forced himself on her. Sonali tried to resist but couldn't escape his grip. He humiliated her in her pain and helplessness. After that night, Sonali's life in her in-laws' house became hell. Shankar, realizing she couldn't resist, grew increasingly cruel. He was abusive not only to his daughter-in-law, but also to his wife, Deepa. Over the years, Deepa had endured oppression and violence, leaving her fearful and hopeless. Completely subdued by her husband, Deepa remained silent about Shankar's heinous acts against Sonali, too afraid to intervene. Her silence only emboldened Shankar. Initially, Shankar was secretive in his assaults on Sonali, carrying out his depraved acts in darkness when no one was around. Sonali, despite her humiliation and heartbreak, tried to stay quiet, knowing no one would support her. However, things quickly changed as Shankar grew complacent, taking his power over Sonali for granted. Shankar began raping Sonali even when others were in the house. He no longer cared about the presence of family or servants. He committed these violent acts in the living room where anyone could see. While his wife Deepa, family members, and even servants were present, no one dared object. They were all terrified of Shankar and endured the atrocities in silence, even as they happened before their eyes. Shankar's cruelty wasn't limited to abusing Sonali. He did it openly and naturally. He felt no guilt or shame. His public humiliation of Sonali became a way to demonstrate his power, showing everyone he could do anything without fear of opposition. Sonali lived in humiliation and despair, knowing no one would protect her. Shankar's actions became more frequent and public, causing her to lose all hope of escaping this hellish life. Meanwhile, her mother-in-law and everyone in the family could only stand by in fear, captives of Shankar's tyrannical power. Rumors circulated in the family about Sachin's condition. It was said that Sachin wasn't born mentally challenged, but became so due to a traumatic incident. According to these whispers, when Sachin was a child, Shankar, in a fit of rage, had struck him hard on the head. That blow allegedly caused severe neurological damage, transforming Sachin from a normal child to one with a low IQ. Many believed that without that fateful strike, Sachin might have grown up to be a normal person. Unable to bear Shankar's brutality and her miserable life, Sonali decided to escape. After months of physical and mental abuse, she knew she had no allies in her husband's family, not even her mother-in-law. Those around her remained silent in the face of Shankar's brutal power. In desperation, she turned to the only person who might help her, Omar, her former love. Secretly and carefully, Sonali wrote a letter to Omar, detailing her suffering and begging for help to escape her hellish life. She no longer cared about the consequences, only wanting freedom at any cost. After sending the letter, Sonali anxiously awaited Omar's response, hoping he still cared for her despite their separate paths. Omar, heartbroken by Sonali's letter, decided to help her escape. They planned to meet one evening and flee from the house of horrors. As night fell, Sonali quietly left home for the second time in her life. She went to Omar, hoping this time they could escape all the tragedies. Both ran away with dreams of a free future, far from all the suffering she had endured. However, their brief freedom was soon threatened when Shankar discovered Sonali's disappearance. He searched frantically for her, eventually visiting Sonali's parents, harassing them, and demanding the return of the dowry. He threatened terrible consequences if they didn't comply. Sonali's family, already poor, couldn't afford to repay such a large sum. Worried and helpless, they begged Sonali to return to her husband's house. In desperation, Sonali was forced to go back to the hell she had tried to escape. She knew this decision meant facing harsher punishments, but she couldn't put her family in danger because of her actions. Upon her return, Shankar became even more cruel and tyrannical. He not only physically abused her, but also forced her to serve him like an animal, stripping away her humanity. Every day, Sonali was forced to do hard and humiliating work without rest or protection of her rights. Shankar no longer saw her as his son's wife, but as a toy, a tool for satisfying his depraved needs and anger. On the fateful night of March 12, 2009, after months of torture and living in despair, Sonali decided to meet Omar again. She couldn't bear it any longer and knew that this time she would either escape hell forever or everything would end in tragedy. Sonali silently planned that night while the family slept. She and Omar took action secretly. Omar snuck into the house through the back door, hiding in a corner, waiting for the right moment to escape with Sonali. Both were tense and worried. While Sonali was preparing in the kitchen to flee with Omar, Shankar suddenly appeared. He had grown suspicious of her frequent evening absences, and his brutal nature emerged once again. Shankar, without hesitation, attempted to force himself on Sonali right there in the kitchen. He cared nothing for the setting or situation, focused only on satisfying his tyrannical needs. But this time, something unexpected happened. Omar, witnessing this horrifying scene, couldn't control his anger and indignation. In a moment of fury, he grabbed a nearby stick and attacked Shankar. The powerful blow from behind struck Shankar squarely on the head, knocking him down instantly. Blood pooled on the floor, and Shankar died from the fatal strike. Both Sonali and Omar panicked after realizing Shankar was dead. They knew the situation was now beyond their control, with no way back. They decided to flee immediately, hoping to escape the police and start a new life elsewhere. However, the murder was quickly discovered. Family members and servants panicked and informed the police as soon as they found Shankar's body. Police immediately arrived at the scene and began an investigation. It didn't take long to identify Sonali and Omar as the suspects. The two couldn't escape for long. The police quickly cordoned off the surrounding area and launched a manhunt. Their trail was exposed, and within hours of their escape, they were arrested. The brief escape ended with Sonali and Omar being escorted back to the police station, their eyes filled with despair and exhaustion. When arrested, both had no choice but to confess to the crime. Omar, out of love and protection for Sonali, claimed he had killed Shankar himself, insisting it was in a fit of rage after witnessing Sonali being tortured. Both understood they had no way out, and their fate was now in the hands of the law. After her arrest, Sonali, mentally and physically exhausted, decided to tell the police everything. She could no longer bear the pain of her abuse and assault. In her desire for freedom, she confessed everything during her interrogation. Sonali recounted in detail what she had endured since entering Shankar's house. She described the abuse she suffered at his hands, the constant fear and humiliation, and the events that led to that fateful night. Her story shocked the investigators, revealing the dark underbelly of what had appeared to be a respectable household. As the investigation unfolded, more details came to light. The police discovered evidence corroborating Sonali's account of long-term abuse. They also found that Shankar's reputation for violence extended beyond his household, with several complaints from the community that had been suppressed due to his influence. The case quickly gained attention in the media, sparking debates about domestic violence, forced marriages, and the plight of women in traditional societies. Activists rallied around Sonali's cause, arguing that her actions were a desperate response to years of abuse and exploitation. The trial that followed was closely watched by the public. Sonali and Omar's defense team argued for leniency, citing the years of abuse Sonali had endured and portraying the killing as an act of self-defense. The prosecution, while acknowledging the abuse, maintained that the killing was premeditated. As the trial progressed, more witnesses came forward, including some of Shankar's former employees and neighbors who testified about his violent behavior. Deepa, Shankar's wife, initially reluctant to speak, eventually provided testimony that supported Sonali's claims of abuse. The case became a focal point for discussions about women's rights in India, highlighting the need for better protection for victims of domestic violence and more support for women trapped in abusive marriages. It also shed light on the darker aspects of arranged marriages and the power dynamics within traditional family structures. After months of hearings, the court finally reached a verdict. Taking into account the years of abuse Sonali had suffered and the circumstances of the killing, the judge handed down a reduced sentence. While both Sonali and Omar were found guilty of manslaughter, they received lighter sentences than what is typically given for murder. The verdict was met with mixed reactions. Some felt justice had been served, considering the circumstances, while others argued that it set a dangerous precedent. The case continued to be discussed long after the trial ended, becoming a reference point in debates about legal reform and social change in India. For Sonali and Omar, the end of the trial marked the beginning of a new chapter. Though they faced years in prison, they found some solace in the fact that their story had been heard and that it might help prevent similar tragedies in the future. As they began serving their sentences, Sonali and Omar's case remained a powerful reminder of the complex intersections of love, duty, abuse, and justice in a changing society. Their story, tragic as it was, became a catalyst for conversations about the need for social reform and better protections for vulnerable individuals trapped in abusive situations. The case of Sonali and Omar continues to be studied in law schools and discussed in social forums, serving as a stark example of how systemic issues in society can lead to personal tragedies. It stands as a call for change, urging communities to look more closely at the hidden sufferings within families and to create better support systems for those in need. In the years following the trial, various NGOs and activist groups used Sonali's story to push for stronger laws against domestic violence and better implementation of existing protections. The case also inspired several books and documentaries, each exploring different aspects of the tragedy and its implications for Indian society. As we conclude this episode of True Crime Disclosed, we're left to reflect on the complex factors that led to this tragic outcome. Sonali's story serves as a somber reminder of the hidden struggles many face behind closed doors and the desperate measures some are driven to in their search for freedom from abuse. Remember, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, there are resources available. Seek help, speak out, and know that you're not alone. Thank you for listening to True Crime Disclosed. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.